The studio lights are bright, the audience is buzzing, and for a moment everything looks like a normal morning on daytime television. Until Will Smith leans forward, looks directly across the table at Joy Behar, and the entire room suddenly goes quiet. Quick heads up, subscribe to Backstory Uncovered, because what starts as a normal conversation here is about to take a turn no one expected. The cameras are rolling on an episode of The View, and the audience had been expecting a fairly routine celebrity interview. Will Smith had come on to talk about his latest projects and life after a few very public controversies. The mood at first is friendly. Applause fills the studio as Will walks out, smiling, waving to the crowd. Joy Behar greets him with a polite smile. Will Smith, everyone. The audience claps again. Will sits down, nodding to the crowd. Good to be here. Joy folds her hands on the table. It's been a while since we've seen you on live television like this. Will chuckles lightly. Yeah, it has. For a moment, the energy feels relaxed. The crowd settles into their seats. Cameras zoom closer. Joy begins the conversation calmly. You've had, let's call it a complicated couple of years. A few audience members laugh nervously. Will nods slowly. That's a fair way to put it. Joy tilts her head slightly. A lot of people have been wondering when you'd finally speak openly about everything. Will keeps his smile, but it tightens just a little. Well, that's why I'm here. The audience murmurs in anticipation. Joy leans back in her chair. So let's start with the obvious question. There's a brief pause. The room feels suddenly heavier. Why now? Will exhales slowly through his nose. His fingers tap once on the table. Well, sometimes it takes a little time to understand your own story before you can tell it. The audience gives a small supportive clap. Joy nods, but she doesn't move on. Some people, she says carefully, feel like they've been waiting for accountability. The word accountability hangs in the air. Will's expression changes almost imperceptibly. Not angry, not defensive, but serious. I get that, he says quietly. Joy continues. And others think you've stayed silent for too long. There's a faint gasp from somewhere in the audience. Will glances briefly toward the crowd, then back at Joy. You know, silence isn't always avoidance. Joy raises an eyebrow. Oh. Will leans forward slightly. Sometimes silence is reflection. The audience reacts with a few claps, but the tension doesn't fade. Joy presses on. But reflection usually leads to answers. Will nods. It does. Joy folds her arms lightly on the table. So today, are we getting answers? The audience grows still. Will looks down at the table for a moment. When he looks back up, his tone has changed. Yeah, he says softly. I think today we are. A ripple moves through the crowd. Joy nods once. Okay. She pauses, then speaks more directly. Let's talk about the moment that changed everything. The audience immediately shifts in their seats. Everyone knows what she means. The camera cuts to Will's face. He doesn't smile this time. Instead, he nods slowly. You mean the moment people decided they knew exactly who I was? Joy tilts her head again. Some would say that moment showed them who you really were. A few members of the audience gasp. Will doesn't respond immediately. Instead, he leans back slightly, rubbing his hands together. The pause stretches long enough to make people uncomfortable. Then he speaks. You know, that's interesting. Joy waits. Will continues. Because the hardest thing about being human is that people only see you at your worst moment. The audience murmurs again. Joy doesn't back down. But when that moment happens on a global stage, Will finishes her sentence quietly. It becomes the only moment that matters. Joy nods. Exactly. For a second, neither of them speak. The silence feels louder than the applause earlier. Then Will shifts in his chair and looks directly at Joy. You ever made a mistake on live TV? The audience laughs nervously. Joy smiles slightly. Probably a few. Will nods. Now imagine that mistake replaying around the world for months. Joy crosses her arms. That's part of being a public figure. Will nods again. I agree. But then his tone changes again, calm but firm. The question is whether people want growth or punishment. The audience reacts loudly to that line. Some clap. Others murmur. Joy looks thoughtful but still skeptical. Well, some viewers feel you haven't really addressed the emotional impact of what happened. Will blinks once. What do you mean? Joy leans forward now. The people who watched it. The fans. The audience. They felt shocked. Disappointed. Will nods slowly. I was too. Joy seems surprised by the answer. You were. Will lets out a short breath. Yeah. The audience goes quiet again. Joy studies him carefully. You shocked yourself. Will gives a small, almost painful smile. Absolutely. Another pause. Joy looks at her notes but doesn't read them. Then why did it take so long to say that publicly? Will looks out toward the audience. Then back at Joy. Because, when you're trying to understand something about yourself. He pauses. The worst place to do it is in front of millions of people. The audience claps again, more loudly this time. Joy raises a hand slightly to quiet them. But people also expect transparency. Will nods. They deserve honesty. Joy leans forward again. Then let me ask you something very directly. The room feels like it tightens. Will meets her gaze. Go ahead. Joy speaks slowly, clearly. When you look back at that moment now, do you regret it? The audience holds its breath. Will doesn't answer immediately. Instead, he looks down again. Then he looks back up. Yes. The audience exhales almost collectively. Joy nods. That's the first time I've heard you say it that plainly. Will tilts his head slightly. Sometimes the simplest answer takes the longest to reach. Joy studies him again. But regret and accountability aren't always the same thing. A few people in the audience murmur louder now. Will's expression tightens slightly. What are you suggesting? Joy shrugs lightly. I'm asking whether regret is enough. The room grows tense again. Will leans forward slowly. His voice is still calm, but there's a new intensity in it. You know, that's a really interesting question. Joy watches him carefully. Will continues. Because sometimes people ask for accountability. He pauses. But what they really want is confession. The audience reacts immediately, some clapping, others whispering. Joy raises an eyebrow. And you're saying that's different? Will nods. Very. Joy leans back again. Well, maybe you can explain the difference. Will looks at her. For a moment, it seems like he's deciding how far he wants to go. Then he says something that instantly shifts the atmosphere in the studio. Accountability is about growth. He pauses. Confession is about humiliation. The audience gasps. Joy's eyes widen slightly. And suddenly the calm tone of the interview is gone. Because now it feels less like a conversation. And more like a confrontation. For a few seconds after that sentence, the studio is completely silent. Not the polite TV silence filled with applause cues or background music, the real kind. Across the table, Joy Behar studies Will Smith carefully, as if deciding whether to challenge what he just said, or let it sit. The audience shifts in their seats. Joy breaks the silence first. Well, she says slowly, that's a strong distinction. Will nods slightly but doesn't smile. It's an important one. Joy leans forward, folding her hands together. But people watching might say this isn't about humiliation. It's about responsibility. Will inhales quietly. And I agree with that. Joy raises an eyebrow. You do. Will nods. Absolutely. He glances briefly toward the audience before looking back at her. But responsibility and public punishment aren't the same thing. A few audience members clap. Others murmur. Joy tilts her head again. So you feel you've already been punished? Will lets out a short breath. I think the world made sure of that. The audience reacts with a mix of laughter and nervous agreement. Joy presses a little further. But some people would say the consequences were necessary. Will nods slowly. Maybe they were. That answer seems to catch Joy off guard for a moment. You think they were? Will pauses, choosing his words carefully. Consequences teach you things that comfort never will. The audience claps louder this time. Joy waits for the applause to fade. Then let's talk about what you learned. Will's expression shifts again, softer now. He looks down at the table briefly. I learned that one moment can erase 20 years of people believing they understand you. The audience murmurs. Joy replies quickly, or reveals something they didn't see before. Will looks back up. That too. Another pause settles over the studio. Joy studies him. So what did that moment reveal about you? Will leans back slightly in his chair. For the first time during the interview, he looks genuinely reflective rather than defensive. It revealed that I'm still human. A few people clap immediately. Joy nods slowly. But you were always human. Will shakes his head gently. No, not to everyone. The audience grows quiet again. He continues. For a long time people saw me as the guy who always had it together. Always smiling. Always positive. Joy interrupts softly. The nice guy image. Will points lightly at her. Exactly. He shrugs. And when you build an image like that for 30 years... He pauses. People forget you're capable of breaking too. The audience murmurs with a more sympathetic tone now. Joy looks thoughtful. But some critics say the image wasn't the problem. The action was. Will nods immediately. They're right. That quick answer surprises the audience again. Joy leans forward. So you agree with your critics? Will gives a small smile. Some of them, yeah. A ripple of laughter moves through the room. Joy smiles briefly but quickly returns to a serious tone. Then what would you say to the people who felt disappointed in you? Will turns slightly toward the audience now. His voice lowers. I'd say they had every right to be. The room goes quiet again. Joy watches him closely. You're not arguing with that? No. Not defending it? No. Joy pauses. Then why do you think this moment, this conversation, matters now? Will takes a deep breath. Because silence leaves room for everyone else to write your story. The audience murmurs again. And eventually, he continues, you realize if you don't speak, people assume you have nothing to say. Joy nods slowly. That's fair. Then she asks one more question, her tone careful but pointed. So let me ask you this, Will. He looks at her. If that moment never happened, would we be having this honest of a conversation right now? The audience reacts with a loud, oh. Will pauses. He actually laughs quietly. That's a good question. Joy smiles slightly. I try. Will leans back, thinking for a second. Honestly. Joy nods. Honestly. Will looks out toward the audience again. Probably not. The audience laughs softly. Joy chuckles. So, in a strange way. Will finishes her thought. The worst moment of my career forced the most honest conversation of my life. A wave of applause fills the studio. Joy nods slowly, acknowledging the reaction. But honesty also means accepting how people feel. Will nods. I know. Joy gestures lightly toward the audience. Some people forgave you. Some haven't. Will shrugs gently. And that's okay. Joy looks surprised again. You're okay with that? Will smiles faintly. You can't demand forgiveness. The audience claps loudly again. You can only earn it, or live without it. For a moment, the tension that filled the studio earlier seems to soften. Joy leans back in her chair. Well, I'll give you credit. Will raises an eyebrow. That sounds dangerous. The audience laughs. Joy smiles. You didn't dodge the questions. Will shrugs lightly. What's the point of coming here if I'm going to do that? Joy nods. Fair enough. The crowd applauds again. Will glances around the studio, taking in the audience. Then he turns back toward Joy. Can I say one last thing? Joy gestures with her hand. Go ahead. Will looks directly into the camera now. For anyone who watched that moment and felt disappointed. He pauses. I understand why. The audience grows quiet again. But I also hope people remember something. Joy watches him carefully. We're all more than our worst day. The audience erupts into applause. Some people even stand. Joy nods slowly, clearly acknowledging the reaction. Well, that's certainly something people will be talking about. Will smiles faintly. I figured. Joy looks toward the camera with a knowing expression. And something tells me the internet is already reacting. The audience laughs again. Will stands as the applause continues, nodding politely to the crowd. The tension that started the conversation has turned into something different. Not exactly resolution, but understanding. Before the segment ends, Joy turns once more to the viewers. So now we want to hear from you. She gestures toward the camera. What did you think about this conversation? Will nods beside her. Yeah. I'm curious too. Joy smiles. Let us know in the comments, and if you want more conversations that reveal the real stories behind moments like this. Will points playfully toward the camera. Make sure you subscribe to Backstory Uncovered. The audience applauds one last time as the cameras slowly pull back and the studio lights fade on a conversation that started tense and ended with the entire room thinking.